Is it even possible to take a tabletop paint job and level it up? Yes. Yes, it is. Sometimes you have to paint your minis quickly, and that means a tabletop ready paint job. Nothing wrong with that. That's what I had to do with my Taurian Force when I took part in the 2-day competition at my local gaming shop. Now the tournament's over though, I want to take my minis up a notch. So can I level my minis up from tabletop to top notch? Let's find out. So this video is split into 2 parts. The first part rattles through painting a mech to tabletop standard. I run through a base, then a wash, then some highlights, using only 2 colours, Chimera Red and Vallejo Green Brown. Oh, and black and white too. But there's nothing fancy going on here. All the mechs were painted in about an hour or so, should be achievable. The second part of the video goes over taking that tabletop paint scheme and elevating it to a slightly higher level by adding in those little details like more contrast, better edge highlights, painting in the cockpit glass, for example. I had loads of fun making this video, so thank you for tuning in, and let's get into it. There's no reason you can't do this with a brush, but I was in a rush, and airbrushes were made for this sort of work. So I grabbed my spraying stick, some blue tack, popped on the models and bases, and I got spraying. A few passes of thin paint is all you need here, just enough to get an even coverage over the entire model. The first batch of mechs, I primed black, then I went over with my base coat. But the second batch, I just went in with that base coat straight away, and it made no difference whatsoever. So cut out an extra step, and I was well happy. One less layer of paint means more detail too. Next up, an oil wash. I want a fast way to add a darker shadow to the recesses and lower areas of the model. You could use an acrylic wash here, like Nuln Oil or Agrax, but I don't want to risk the tide marks that acrylic washes can sometimes leave. Because that Vallejo Green Brown is our base colour, we want something that will work nicely with that. So I chose a brown oil wash. That'll act as the shade and hopefully cut out some of the work that we need for the gradients. On it goes. Thick as you like, the point is to get into all those recesses. Don't worry about it covering absolutely every detail. It'll all come off in just a second, as you'll see. Then we let it dry out. Now, if you let oil paint dry naturally, it can take days, or even weeks sometimes. So we're going to use a hairdryer to speed it up. Once it's touch dry, we're going to use a cloth or a sponge just to wipe any excess off. Then we're going to take another clean sponge, add some white spirit to it, and wipe off all the oil wash from all the raised areas, but being careful to leave the oil wash in the places where we want shading, so particularly in the recesses, but also on perhaps those lower portions of the model, like the legs. Then it needs to dry properly. So at this point, I put it down, left it a few days, and came back to it. If you want to hurry it up though, as I say, you can always just jump in with a hairdryer and go at it. This next step is fast and satisfying.
That's what she said!
In fact, you could just do this bit and leave it there. So take your Chimera Red and work it on your wet palette until you get a paint that you can apply without leaving brush strokes. I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later in the video if that helps. We're going to paint all the areas that we want red. Some people call this blocking in. Either way, it's really simple and it's really fun. To take this stage up a notch, you can always just add a little bit of black into that Chimera Red just to add a darker stage too. You'll see that in the next part of the video as well. Then repeat this step with your khaki colour. The purpose of this is just to neaten up any washes that went in slightly the wrong place. The last stage of this tabletop ready section are some basic edge highlights. Nice and simple. You just want your paints a tone lighter than our highlight colour, and you want your paints a touch thicker here too, because they go on a lot smoother if they are. Simply pick out the edges closest to the directional light and leave the opposite side. I think it looks cool if you pick out the corners too. Work your way around the whole model using the red and the khaki, and you're done. So there we go. Each model took about an hour to paint up, which is great for a tabletop ready army. I just want to interrupt you to say that if this video has been useful so far, make sure you like the video, comment down below and help share it around on social media, as it helps others find the video too. I really appreciate it. And if you're shopping for hobby bits and pieces, check out the description down below, because I'm starting to build up a bit of a catalogue of extra discount codes and other bits and pieces you can take advantage of if you're in the USA or the UK. Thanks so much. So before I can start actually painting anything, I've got a few bits and pieces I need to fix on this model. First up is the mould slip on the LRM. This is a scalpel. It's really sharp and it's got a really flexible blade. I'm not going to bother with health and safety briefing, all adults here, but all we're doing is just scraping away gently just to remove that back down to a nice flat surface that we can paint a nice new coat on. Simple as that. It looks a little ugly, but it's actually pretty simple to fix, as you'll see next. Many people in the last video told me I had my Griffin mounted wrong, so one of the first things I decided to do was fix that. Off he comes, and I trimmed the base for his new position, sanded it flat, and then we're ready to repair the rest. The base is a nice, simple fix. We're just going to take our Vallejo green-brown colour, paint up any areas that have been exposed by all the sanding and cutting, paint it back, and then just use the same recipe we did in the original, which is cover it all in red pigment powder. Bosh. Done. If you want to make it look super fancy, you can go back in with your green-brown colour and dry brush over the top, just to pick out any details. But these bases were really fast. One of the main things you can do to make any paint job better is to up the contrast. Contrast is the difference between the light and dark areas, and it helps to make the model more readable. The way we're going to do that here is by mixing up a dark red colour. Take a tiny dot of Chimera Black, and then add Chimera Red to it until you get a colour that you like the look of. You don't need to worry too much about consistency here. I'm using a wet palette for exactly that reason, but if it is a bit thick or you start to see brush strokes left in the paint, you can always just add a little bit of water. We're going to start up by fixing that LRM. Just a quick base coat over the entire section will do the trick. Then I want to start building in that contrast. So all I'm going to do is apply in the bottom left hand corner up towards the top right hand corner that dark red colour. What I want to end up for is a nice gradient. Once we've applied that dark red colour, we can then go in with some neat Chimera Red and apply that from the top right hand corner. By the time we're done, we end up with a high contrast gradient that's nice and simple to achieve. Almost immediately, it starts to look a little bit ropey, and I begin to question my life choices, but I'm on this train for the whole ride now. For the cylinder at the LRM, I wanted to add some volume, so that meant painting a stripe along the entire length of the shape. When you're adding volume, it's important to follow the shape. For cylinders, that highlight always runs down the full length. Now it's going to look a little strange at first, but we're just going to have to glaze backwards and forwards to soften that out, and it'll come good eventually. Glazing is simple enough. You just take your colour and you extend it or thin it out a little bit to make it more translucent. Then dab off any excess liquid on a piece of paper towel and go back to your paint. Then you apply the paint toward the colour you want to end at. So if you're glazing in shadows, take your paint and apply in brush strokes away from our highlights to the darkest point, and vice versa. Let it dry before you paint over it again. If you don't, what can happen is the paint can tear below and you'll end up with a rough, wrinkled texture that you try and paint over. And you'll just lose that smooth effect that you would get otherwise. In order to get the smooth, desired effect that you want, you're going to need to repeat this step lots of times. But because the paint is so thin, even if you mess it up slightly, you're not making too much of an impact. Now as you can see, it still looks, well, not very good actually, but we're not going to lose faith. Edge highlights next. With our edge highlights, we want to pick our edges facing towards our light source, so the top right hand side. The plan is 3 passes, adding orange to our red, then a touch of white, then a touch of yellow. Each time we cover a slightly smaller area, so that by the end you've got a nice gradient that draws the eye to the focal point. The joy of painting mechs is they're all panels and hard edges. Simply pop your brush side on and run it over. If you mess up, don't worry, you can always go over the panel again to tidy it up later. It's worth loading your brush up here too. Not so it's dripping with paint, just so that the belly is full. That way it takes longer to dry out. Simply work your way around the whole model, and then at the end, pop it down, take a deep breath, and then you can go again. Now we've added a little bit of orange to the mix, and we just go over those same edge highlights again. On this pass, you can see we're painting a slightly smaller area than the last time. That's intentional, and it's just to build up a little bit of a gradient in there. The other thing you'll see is that the model really starts to come together in this stage. By highlighting those edges, particularly the leading edges on places like the LRM, it really helps to sell the effect that we're looking for. The other place you really want to pick out are the inside of those missile barrels on that LRM. Doing that just helps to bring a little bit more focus to those points and just, again, makes the model look a whole lot better. Just to hammer this point home, here's me going over with the yellow pass. As a fun little side note, the brush I'm using here is by Redgrass Games and it's a size 2. It's got a lovely sharp tip, and thank you very much to Redgrass for sending it to me. Finally, it's starting to look good, but now I have to tackle the cockpit. Now I've been dreading this. I hate painting small details. I'm not very good at it, that's why I paint big, large scale models. So I always find this section super stressful. First, I attempted a dark red in the bottom corner and an orange red in the top, but I mucked up. Deep breath. Here we go again. Now, I was partly hampered by my print here. The details are really soft, so I had to work hard to be neat. How I overcame this was by slowly blacking out the edges of all the glass, and all of a sudden it became way easier. I went over the dark red with a yellow, and ta-da! The only thing left is the big reveal. So all in all, I've probably spent 3 to 4 hours painting these models. And while I ran into a few more problems than I would have liked, I'm actually pretty happy that I persevered and ended up with something that I like the look of. So it's all good. If you've liked this model and you want to find out more about the painting techniques I use in the video, you can check out the playlist in the bottom corner, or roll the dice and see what YouTube suggests for you. Thanks so much.